with the Cleveland Cavaliers completing a trade for Peyton Watson, a signing trade for Peyton Watson, also re-signing James Harden, as well as the Toronto Raptors expected to finalize the Kawhi Leonard trade soon, the Eastern Conference is going to be a wild conference and one of the deepest conferences that we've seen in basketball in quite a while. The question now is where do the rebuilding Chicago Bulls really fit in the Eastern Conference? Because you have teams that are clearly ahead of them in the Knicks, Philly, all the type of teams that you talk about. What tier are the Bulls in? We're going to talk about that and what this means for the Bulls season and more right after this. What's going on, Bulls fans? Welcome to another episode of Chicago Bulls Central, your number one spot for everything Chicago Bulls related. I'm the host there, Haize, but more importantly, you guys can follow the channel at Bulls Central Pod on every social media platform we happen to be on. With that said, let's go into this content for today, y'all. And Chicago's rebuilding in the Eastern Conference has gotten much more difficult over the course of this offseason. The East is not the soft conference that it once was and looked at anymore. This is an extremely deep conference, right? You have teams that are clear championship contenders in New York, Philly, Cleveland, Boston, right? You have teams as well that are going to be another dangerous group of teams in Miami, Detroit, Indiana, Toronto. Then you have Atlanta, Orlando, Charlotte, Washington, all trying to stay ahead of the Chicago Bulls as well. And this makes it a scenario where, if the Bulls were to even get into the play-in this season, in the first year as a rebuild, it's going to be a much deeper gauntlet than what people are, right? Now, there are a segment of Bulls fans that do think that this team could contend for that. Now, I'm going to take a wait-and-see approach. I do think we are a much more balanced team, but I do think this is a team that could struggle, right, especially with the number of young players that you have. And, it takes a while to learn to win. Sometimes you have teams that young. Like, I keep using the thing that this team could be a team that stays competitive for maybe 3 out of 4 quarters and then just doesn't know how to close out games, especially against some of those more veteran teams, right? So, that's this thing that the Bulls are not rebuilding in an empty conference. Yeah, they're not. They're rebuilding in a conference that has a lot of traffic at a lot of different levels, and that's it, right? So when you look at the tiers, let's first establish the tiers of teams, right? First, you have the championship tier, which is New York, Philly, Cleveland, Boston. Indiana could be right up in there with that tier, but it's depending on how quickly Tyrese Haliburton gets back in rhythm, stuff like that. Detroit, which was the team that had the most wins in the Eastern Conference in the regular season, they could be right up there. They're going to try to make their argument for it as well. The Bulls aren't anywhere near this tier or this group yet, right? That's not hate. That's not doubt. That's just the reality. They're going to have to prove that they can move up these tiers. And this is just not a tier where they are right now. Now, Caleb hits hits his star potential. Midas hits a leap. Who knows, right? But this is about, when you look at the upper echelon teams in the Eastern Conference, those are those teams. Then you look at the teams like that are kind of more near the Bulls, kind of neighborhood of teams. That's just Charlotte, the Washingtons. They're going to be near that. Atlanta, I think, is still a tier above the Chicago Bulls, as is Orlando, those type of teams. But, we talked about it when NBA.com ranked the Chicago Bulls 13th in the Eastern Conference, right? That means that when you look at the teams that were directly ahead of the Chicago Bulls in that were Atlanta, Orlando, Charlotte, and Washington, right? So that's the neighborhood that the Bulls are trying to get into, right? If they can, by the end of the season, prove that they're up there with those teams. And if they don't, it's not a bad thing either. We'll talk about why that is, right? So that's what you're looking at right now. I think if the Bulls finish anywhere between 9 and 13, on the season, it depends on how we got there, right? It depends on how we finish the season and those type of things. But the Bulls' first real climb is not catching up to the Phillies or the New Yorks or anything. It's catching up to those teams that are in that tier right above them. And that's the reality of it, right? And so this is an evaluation season. And I think people have a misunderstanding of the difference between an evaluation season and a tanking season. The Bulls aren't ready to compete for a title. We all know that. They're nowhere close to that. But that doesn't mean tanking. And even now in the modern NBA, and that's what's another thing that's going to make the Eastern Conference in the league overall more is that, tanking isn't rewarded in the same way that it used to be. You're not going to get the best odds by having the worst record. You can actually get the best odds by winning more and actually competing for a play-in spot. And so that means that right now, with development being the focus, that's what an evaluation season is. You are trying to evaluate the talent for current fit, long-term fit, and you're trying to develop those guys in that path to get there, right? And so the Bulls may not be chasing the 10 seed. They may not be chasing anything but development. I do think that if the play-in does come because of this young core, if the play-in becomes of this young core that's driving the Bulls to win, that's a huge step in the sign of the rebuild. That's a huge sign of exactly where this rebuild is and where we could be. So when you go back to those tiers that I talked about, right? You have New York, Philly, Cleveland, Boston in the championship tier. The established playoff team tier, which is tier number 2, which are also dangerous challengers in the East. That's where you have your Detroits, your Indiana, your Miamis, your Torontos. And then the group that the Bulls are trying to catch, the Atlantas, the Orlandos, the Charlottes, the Washingtons, right? That's where the Bulls are with this and in this path right now. And so, when you look at it, that means that everything that the Bulls do right now should be about how you progress forward, especially with your young core. That is the first thing that you have to do. It's not about adding some mythical talent to then make the Bulls a contender. It's not about that. It's about developing this core of young guys that you have, and then that gets you to a certain stage, and then you can start being more aggressive about making moves and those type of things, right? So that's where the Bulls are right now. And this Eastern Conference is going to be deadly. But the thing that you look at it as a plus, like, let's say that the Bulls do punch above their weight, right? Let's say that they do compete closer with those teams. That's going to say a lot about where this team is, if you can do that. Now, we all know, we've all talked about it at this point, the start of the schedule for the Chicago Bulls is hellacious. It's tough. It's going to be a very tough start of the season for the Chicago Bulls, and they may have one of the toughest starts of the season in the NBA. And they may come out of that stretch not with the best record. They may be going into December, January, something like that with a well below 500 record. It's a possibility. But if they do come out and they are closer to 500, or God forbid they are at 500, that may be a sign that we're on the right direction and right path with this team, and we've gotten the right type of people in here. So there's a couple of questions that are in front of the Bulls that hopefully they're going to find some answers for. How confident do you feel that Caleb Wilson can be the guy? By the end of this season, how confident are you in that? It's not about him being the guy by the end of the season, but what have you seen from him that makes you feel like he can be there, right? He doesn't need to average 20 even right away. I know that, some Bulls fans have these high expectations, and that's not a bad thing because he's coming in with a lot of hype. He's a very talented player, right? But how many star traits do you see from Caleb Wilson, right? How does his defense become transformative over the course of the season going? How much pressure is he able to get at the rim, the rebounding, those type of things? The development of his shooting is going to be a big thing over his rookie year too. And then I wonder how much Tiago Splitter is going to put him in a position to create some offense. Right now, my expectation is for Modest Buzelis to kind of be the stagger guy with the Bulls bench. That could maybe Tiago Splitter splits that time with Caleb Wilson as well to give Caleb Wilson some opportunities to be that guy. But I think when you look at Modest, the leap that he's expected to take, his potential as a point forward, all those type of things, Modest being the stagger guy with the bench unit, it allows you to kind of help push him along that leap that we want to see from him in year 2 without it being force-feeding him the ball, right? And you need a score on that with that bench unit too. So I look at that. But how much creation? We'll get into Modest Buzelis in a second. How much creation does Caleb Wilson flash in his rookie year? If he starts looking like a player that could be a number 1 or number 2 by the end of the season, that already gives you more information to work with and deal with, and it gives you a blueprint for what you want to do. Then the number 2, what we just talked about. Did Modest Buzelis make the leap by the end of this season? He proved he belonged. We talked about on yesterday's episode, all those things that we talked about, right? If he proves that he can be a high-level player, not just an NBA starter, but a high-level NBA starter, you start seeing those things with better efficiency, creation, the defensive steps that he needs to make as well, ability to get to the free throw line, all those type of stuff. It doesn't feel like a failure if the Bulls get that out of Modest Buzelis. Now, that's going to put a lot on Modest to show and prove, to put in that work. Those are the things that we need. But I do think if Modest is looking like he's flashing some of that star potential, or much less being a high-level co-star next to who you hope your star is going to be eventually in Caleb Wilson, that's another win. Part 3, the Josh Giddey part of this evaluation, right? Josh Giddey proving the value that he has, the value that we see on the court, and that he is part of this future for the Chicago Bulls team, right? His role as a connector, as an organizer, and sometimes as a scorer as well, even though that is not the most seamless role for him. That's it. How much easier does Josh Giddey make the game on everybody else? That is Josh Giddey's gift. He can make offense out of nothing, right? And when you look at some of the players that Josh Giddey was passing to last season, and the fact that he still was towards the top of the league in assists and also possible assists that were left because his team couldn't shoot effectively, that shows a lot. But it's not just the assists. It's not just the organizing of the offense. It's not just the rebounding from the guard position. We know he can do those things. Does the shooting hold, right? Does that hold? Does he defend well enough? Josh Giddey has turned into a solid on-ball defender. Not great, not locked down, but a solid on-ball defender. The pick-and-roll defense is where he gets really caught up the most at. Now, we do have, theoretically, on this roster, more ability to switch and recover in pick-and-roll defense, and we'll see what happens in that one. But Josh Giddey also has to prove in the half court that he can initiate offense against the good East defenses, because, again, the East is going to be a test this year. And so if those three things happen, right, we're going to talk about more in that. But if those three things happen, you already have a solid foundation. That's not saying that, hey, if Noah Essenke, Dalen Swain, Leonard Miller, any of these guys show anything, you already have a nice young foundation if you're able to do that. Josh Giddey doesn't have to be a superstar. He doesn't have to be that. But he does need to be a player that at least makes the superstar's job easier at a high level and makes the role players better when they're on the court with him. And that's a role that Josh Giddey can do. And that's, like I said, out of base. Josh Giddey continues to make the strides and the step in this game that he had. We're going to be talking about Josh Giddey differently, too. And a lot of these Bulls fans that kind of hate on Josh Giddey may have to shut up. But that's a story for another day. We'll cross that for another day. The next part of it, right, is that how do you feel about the veteran scoring on this team? The veteran options that you have here are going to tell a lot, right? Because I think that what you've done right now is that you've added veterans. You have veterans that support but don't get in the way of the growth of your young players. That's Norman Powell. That's Nick Claxton. That's Trey Jones. That's Jalen Smith, right? There's Zach Collins in a way, too. You have 5 veterans on this team that all can help contribute and help the development of the young players that you have here. You're just looking at now, okay, when those guys move off or whatever it is, how do we replace those guys? Because that is going to tell you a lot about the foundation that you're trying to build here, too. Now, there are going to be real opportunities for players like Rob Dillingham, Dalen Swain, Jalen Sellers, Leonard Miller, Noah Essenke, right? That they can show that they deserve more of a role. Tiago Splitter is going to give all those guys a chance. Now, that doesn't mean that all those guys are going to take advantage of that. They may not be ready for that here now, right? We'll see what happens in regards to that. But you need 2 to 3 of those young players step up. The one I feel the most confident in is Leonard Miller. I feel Leonard Miller is going to have a really strong season here for the Chicago Bulls. So then you're looking at 1 to 2 more of those guys. Is it Jalen Sellers? Is it Dalen Swain? Is it Noah Essenke? And I know people are going to say, Haize, but you didn't mention Patrick Williams. Y'all know why I'm not mentioning Patrick Williams. Now, if Patrick Williams even proves it, then great. Like I've said before, as much as I have doubt for players like Patrick Williams, I'm going to say this. If Patrick Williams earns a role, nobody should be mad. If he earns a role and plays well, whatever that role is, nobody should be mad at P. Will minutes. But the problem is that not many Bulls fans really believe that he's going to do that. But, hey, give him a chance to prove you wrong, right? I think that Bryson Graham, by the end of the season, has to have a better idea on how to complement Caleb Modest and Josh Giddey. Who is doing that on this team? Who is better complementing those teams? That information, that means on what you go out there and get in the offseason. How do you project the next set of leaps of what's going to come in there? That informs what you want to attack in the draft, those type of things, right? So how many veteran-led wins do we have? How many young player-led wins that we have? That's going to be the interesting delineation for the Chicago Bulls this offseason, is that how many of these wins are powered by Modest, Giddey, and Caleb? How many wins are powered by Norman Powell, right? Trey Jones, Jalen Smith? How many wins are powered by those guys? Because the delineation between those two, that's going to tell you a lot as well about where your young foundation is and that foundation that you're trying to build around going forward into the future. We talked about the 4 tiers of this team. By the end of the season, does this team look like it's jumping into the next tier? Do you feel like, oh, next season we're definitely going to be from tier 4 to tier 3? Or do we think we can even flirt with tier 2? Like, what do we feel like we are in that one? Becoming competitive. The teams that are competitive, Atlanta, Washington, Charlotte, Orlando. Those teams are expected to be competitive. Can we be in that tier with those teams? Some people are going to probably respond in this video in this comment saying, Haize, we're already up there with Washington and Charlotte. And hey, I'll tell you this. I hope that you're right. I hope that you're right. I hope that we see that, right? I just got to see it. And that's not a knock on this Bulls team, but there's so much new on this team that we don't know how Tiago's going to look at and see these guys. We don't know how some of these guys are going to perform in a new situation. We don't know those type of things. But at the end of the day, if what we see is going to be what we see, and we're going to go off of that, right? So I think that, if this team continues to improve and your young core is the reason why you're improving, that's a lot different than being led by your veterans, which was the problem under the last build, is that we weren't led by the Kobe Whites and the Patrick Williams and the Ayo Dosunmus for large portions of that. It was DeMar DeRozan. It was Nikola Vucevic. It was Zach LaVine, right? It was those players that were leading us to those, 38, 39 win seasons. Now it's about this young core and how many of those games are they leading to there, right? Washington is also a very fascinating comparison for the Chicago Bulls, right? Because Washington is another young team that has this young core of players, but they also have these veterans, right? Like in Trey Jones. I'm sorry, Trey Jones, Trey Young, that they have there, and Anthony Davis, who they have there, right? Players that have been all-stars before. But then you still have this young team that you're looking at and saying, how much of the development of these guys are gonna take the forefront of it over the course of the season? That's gonna be the fun and interesting thing to watch, right? The AJ DeBonces, the Keyshawn George, the Alex Sars in this, the Bub Carringtons in it, the Bilal Coulibaly in this, right? Because if those players also kind of lead that Washington team to more wins than the Trey Young, the Anthony Davises, the Chris Middletons, right? The DeAndre Aytons, who's still weird that they have that on that team. It gives them, and that's the interesting competition part. And a team them and Charlotte are going to be teams that I really like compare the Bulls team to a lot to see where they stand with those teams, right? You look at Charlotte as well. Like Charlotte is a team that won 44 games last season. So many people say, well, Haize, why are you comparing it to a team that almost won 50 games last year? Because, they got rid of LaMelo Ball. They're clearly going younger. Brandon Miller's is probably going to be given the keys, right? Kobe White's on that team too. But they have a nice young set of young players, but they also have veterans that are there to support those young players' growth, and Naz Reid and other players. So it's going to be fun to see, in regards to that one. Like Charlotte and Washington are two teams that I think that I'm going to be comparing the Bulls to a lot. Like, where is Charlotte in the season in this competitive East? Where's Washington? How are the Bulls comparing to that, right? And we'll see. And these are teams that all are kind of going and forging in kind of new directions while still having their foot planted with veterans as well. And we'll see what's going to happen in that. I would not be surprised at all if it's those teams that are going to be kind of all measuring up against each other. But then also another wrinkle in this for the Bulls is that the Central Division is going to be brutal this season. Detroit won 60 games last season. Cleveland won 52 games last season and just added a young two-way player with tremendous upside in Peyton Watson. The Indiana Pacers are getting Tyrese Haliburton back in that, right? Like, this is going to be a very interesting conference in the division, in the Central Division, because you just aren't going to know how things are going to work out in that division. Like all five teams in the Central, like really all five teams in the Central all have the things that are interesting. Now, the Milwaukee Bucks are the ones that are completely rebuilding. They're at the bottom, and the Bulls better well be ahead of them, right? But that's the floor in the Central Division, right? And then you have the teams that are in the upper echelon. The Bulls are kind of in the middle by themselves, trying to show that they belong or with anything. So you have that. And so when you look at all this, what makes 2026 successful for the Chicago Bulls? It's really about development. You've seen some flashes of Caleb Wilson looking like he could be the centerpiece of this team. Modest makes a meaningful year 3 jump, whatever that looks like. Giddey completely fits with those guys as well and elevates the team when he's on the court. And then I think at least if you have at least two of Swain, Dillingham, Miller, Jalen Sellers, Noah Essengay, if they establish themselves in real roles for this team, that's also a win and makes this season successful. And then also, Tiago Splitter as a head coach. Does he implore a style that we feel like, all right, he understands by the end of the season how to use these players, and we're excited about how he's going to develop those guys. And we'll see, right? The Bulls could be better, much better than expected. They also could be worse than expected. Shout out to Norman Powell on that one. And we're going to see. And if the Bulls are bad, right? Like, let's just say the Bulls are bad. It doesn't necessarily mean a failed season, depending on this Modest. Those guys look great, because if you still get development from those guys, you can still take it as not necessarily a win, but we got something that we needed out of this. And Modest, Caleb, those guys developed. Josh Giddey continued to refine, and we got some other things. So it's not just about the win-loss thing. It's about right now the Bulls are at a prove-it stage. How much can they prove in this season? We're going to see. But let me know what you guys think on that part down below. Real quick before we get out of here, CBS Sports ranks the front offices of the league, right? They just came out with their ranking. The Chicago Bulls moved up to number 28 last year after the trade deadline that was still with Acme. And now with the offseason moves of Bryson Graham, they moved up to number 23. Now, I think that's progress when you look at it. You moved up basically a whole tier in the offseason. Caleb Wilson's going to help with that. Of course, the Norman Powell, Nick Claxton acquisitions are going to help with that. It's not a celebration. It's nothing to celebrate about. Being in the 20s in a 30-team league is nothing to celebrate about. But I do think that it does show that there is more kind of interest in what the Chicago Bulls can do. And people are looking at it and just saying that, I take it as that there's more competency in the Bulls front office now than what we had ever before. And it's leading people to look at it and say, all right, like the Bulls now have a cleaner direction. They have a cleaner path. And we trust the guys that are leading them down that path more than what we trusted the last guys to do. And we got to see. The real evaluation is going to start when the season starts. That's it. The real season, the real expectations. Because what Bryson Graham set up was flexibility. It's hard to judge flexibility until you see how that flexibility is used or what it garners you, right? So, of course, the Bulls have some trade chips. I don't know if they're going to move that, but I think that the flexibility that the Bulls held on to is something that definitely has, pundits interested because of the possibilities of what the Bulls do with that flexibility. And we're going to see. Bryson Graham, in a lot of ways, kicked the can down the road this offseason, right? Because of the contracts to Norman Powell, the contract structure maintains flexibility. Same thing with Zach Collins. Nick Claxton's only on a 2-year deal. So the Bulls didn't do anything that really affected their rebuild in the sense that you lost huge assets in the case of that rebuild. It didn't shift the Bulls' future outside of Caleb Wilson and stuff like that, but it also didn't get in the way of future moves, and you continue down the path of a sensible rebuild for the Chicago Bulls. And that's something that's difficult for a lot of teams to do. With player development being the key here for the Bulls, the priority, we're going to see what they do with it. That's what they've made. Bryson Graham has put the onus on how much we develop these players in the first year under him and Tiago Splitter. Now we get to see what happens with that because Caleb, Modest, Giddey, Swain, Dillingham, Sellers, Essengay, all these guys, Leonard Miller, all these guys. How did these guys develop under this first year of this team? Because in year one, if we start seeing those young players show real flashes of being NBA players for some of those guys and further refinement of what we know the skills that they have for the other ones, that's going to be a successful season in a lot of ways for the Bulls too. So I think it goes hand in hand. The Bulls' place that they're in now, where they compete in the East, is directly correlated with this front office's ability to continue to get the best out this group and go down this path of development, use the flexibility correctly, and do those type of things. And we're going to see what that means for the Chicago Bulls. But that's going to do it for today's episode, man. I want to hear from you guys. Sound off down below on where you feel the Bulls are going to rank in this Eastern Conference. What tier do you have them in as things stand right now? What tier do you think they could be in by the end of the season? Let me know that down below. Make sure you guys like the video, subscribe to the channel, hit that notification bell so you never miss an episode at all. You guys can follow us at the Bull Central Pod on every social media platform. You can send us any feedback, questions, comments, concerns, bullcentralpod@gmail.com. And lastly, if you want to leave a text message and our voicemail for the mailbag, the number to do so, 773-270-2799. We are the #1 spot for everything Chicago Bulls related. That is thanks to you, lovely and beautiful people. And like I like to end every episode on, go Bulls. Love you guys. See you right if you can, y'all. Peace.
This has been a presentation of the Breaks Media.